Monday's heinous terrorist attack in Manchester has exposed security loopholes in the UK. With the British general elections coming next month, what can politicians in London offer their citizens to guarantee safety? And Philippine President Duterte cut short his visit to Moscow to tackle Islamist extremists back home. Was Duterte's interrupted visit another step towards the Philippines moving away from its traditional ally, the United States? Welcome to The Point, live from Beijing. I'm Li Xin. 22 people were killed and 64 injured during the bomb attack in Manchester Arena on Monday evening. The bomber was identified as former Salford University student Salman Abedi, a 22-year-old British national born and raised in Manchester to Libyan parents. The UK has raised the terror threat level to its highest level of critical, the third time in history. Now, military personnel will be deployed to counter imminent future attacks. Great Britain has long been viewed as a safe harbour of Europe. What makes it now vulnerable to terrorist attacks, and how will this attack change Britain's future policies? To get more insight, I'm joined from London by Wang Xingang, local councillor of Manchester Central, and James Ferryman, Professor of Computational Vision, University of Reading in the UK. Welcome to the show, gentlemen. Professor Ferryman, now a witness of the bombing said that there weren't any security checks before people were allowed into the arena where American singer Ariana Grande's concert was being held. So what is the nature of British current security system before the bombing?
Well, I mean, security checks are, of course, carried out across a whole range of public spaces. I mean, we're probably used to security checks more so at things like airports, public spaces like this, but also at public venues. In terms of Manchester Arena, I mean, they do have security checks. The question is about the rigour and the challenges around getting people through and into a big arena like that while still managing a sensible level of security. So there are obviously questions around security like that, but perhaps we'll have a longer discussion and go into some of those details.
Another technical detail now, we often talk about CCTV monitoring, and I'm sure an arena of this size would be equipped with the necessary equipment, but it seems that we always only find out about the suspects or suspect afterwards using the CCTV footage. What could it do? What could these kind of CCTV equipment do to help detect and prevent attacks?
Well, as you know, I mean, CCTV is now very pervasive. I mean, there are many tens, hundreds, and sometimes thousands of cameras around public spaces, and particularly around public arenas. Many of those cameras are monitored, or majority of those cameras, and not all of them, are monitored manually. The human operators who survey the scenes around these areas. But there's promise. I mean, there's promise in having automated systems, automated technologies, and automated assessment of CCTV imagery. So you mentioned here in the case that normally we hear or think about using CCTV after an event, but actually there's a case, and the technology does exist today, to actually proactively monitor and actually analyse by computer images coming from CCTV
Are you saying
cameras.
In the case of the Manchester Arena attack, the CCTV was not functioning while the whole event was unfolding? This is my first question. Secondly, how did people find out about Adebi? Were they using CCTV footage somewhere, maybe, if not in the arena?
Well, you'll have to ask the owners of the arena to comment about the availability or usage of CCTV at the venue at the time. I can't comment on that. What I can comment on is how we can better exploit the use of CCTV. Now, you mentioned about using it after an event, but actually before an event, if the authorities know they have someone of interest, let's say. So in this case, I think we know, or the authorities probably have a good idea, and obviously they did know, and they've released the name of the terrorist, of the person involved. If they actually had an identity there, let's say a facial image or even a full body image, it's possible in theory to actually process images from cameras at the venue, but perhaps even before the venue, in other public spaces, for example, the Victoria train station and other areas, through which the person would have actually travelled. So there's a promise that, you know, someone who's known could be detected or recognised before they reach the venue.
So
now,
at this moment,
an analogy here, you may have heard of the phrase, of course.
Yeah, so at this moment we
Yes.
actually do
So
not
give an
have any
example. You may
CCTV
have heard of
footage to help us identify the suspect. Is that what you're saying? And this is quite unbelievable, because I think CCTV is
no,
relatively, you know, very mature technology.
Oh, well, no, I think that's not true. I mean, I can't say, I can't comment on the availability of CCTV from the arena, but certainly in public spaces near the arena, there will be CCTV. And of course, the security services and the police will be looking very closely at that CCTV in order to determine where that offender came from, who they travelled with, if anybody, and also who they spoke to. So are there any accomplices in this act?
Yeah. What about the bigger role, let's say, because right now we are often talking about a lone wolf situation, and many of the materials or much of the information that they get about how to carry out this kind of attack is from the internet. So CCTV in this digital age where everything is done digitally, is there any use at all in helping monitoring this kind of perpetrators?
Well, CCTV is just part of the equation in terms of helping the security forces and the police to track and identify people who may commit a terrorist offence. In relation to the internet, of course, the authorities do monitor how people access the internet. In particular, they would be interested in persons who perhaps search for materials, for example, bomb manuals and things like this. But also they would be interested in persons who buy materials, certain kinds of materials which are known to be used in bombs. The other aspect is actually communication. So rather than just purchasing items and researching items of around bombs, it's actually about communication. So for example, with a lone wolf, they may not know at the time who that individual is, but they may know other people to whom they connect. So for example, if that lone wolf had at any time attempted to communicate with somebody they were aware of, who had an interest in terrorism, they could obviously they could identify and track the person through those means.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor James Ferryman of Computational Vision from the University of Reading. And Mr. Wang Xingang, let me come to you first. Now, first of all, the security level of Great Britain is raised to critical the third time in history. Do you think more stringent security checks will become kind of a new normal of people's lives now?
I don't think so. The current status has changed to critical. That is purely because, based on the current investigation, what we see is either this killer has designed and built the bomb by himself, or someone else has been given this bomb to him. And currently, both the government and also the police authority, they are unable to rule out the possibility that someone else gave the bomb to them. That means there may be someone else are still out there, and this is where the security status has been changed to a critical. That means currently the security service, they are out there as we speak.
Now the bomber was identified as Salman al-Debi, a 22-year-old British citizen, and let's not forget, on March the 22nd, the Westminster attack was also committed by a British-born man. So why do terrorist attacks keep happening from within, and are there any effective actions to prevent domestic terrorism?
I think this is a very good question, because what we see is, as we evolve, so are the terrorists. And then they actually are able to motivate people from, for example, British nationals, trying to actually convince them, trying to become converted into terrorists. And this is the new challenge that not only Britain, but also the rest of Europe and the rest of the world need to actually work together, trying to look at this is the new norm of the terrorism, how we actually work together to attack it.
Now, this terrorist attack to some degree has exposed the problem of integrating immigrants in Britain. What difficulties are immigrants facing at this moment, and what's their attitude about Brexit?
I think let's look at the communities. I'm Chinese, as you can see, and then I came to UK and become part of the society. The Chinese community is one very important part of the British society, and so as all other communities, Muslim communities and other communities. It depends on individual how you want to involved and get involved into become the mainstream of the society. And the British society is very open, very inclusive, and this is where what we see that Britain, the country, is actually very open. It is down to the individual who actually in their personal circumstances, and we need to see why they're doing things in this way.
Yeah, now this attack also happened just weeks before the general election. Was this a coincidence? If not, how do you think the terrorists are trying to affect possibly the election results?
First of all, I have been monitoring the announcement from the government and the police security, and currently the organization behind the attack has not been announced. I know there's some media saying that this could be ISIS behind it, but this has not been verified. So what I proposed is let's wait until that the authority finish the investigation. We know who is behind it, and we start to go back and run the analysis on why they're doing this and what is the motive of the bombing.
Now, Britain is striving to accelerate the process of leaving EU, and one important reason is to keep immigrants or refugees possibly from entering Britain to reduce terrorist attacks. After what happened in Manchester, how much do you think Brexit can help stem the spectre of terrorism?
Brexit currently what we see is back in March the government has triggered the Article 50, and there will be another 2 years process for negotiating about the exit process. Before the March of 2019, we do not know what deals has been negotiated. Therefore, currently it's very difficult to say. But what we do see is part of the government discussions and the negotiations with the EU, the cooperation of terrorism and attacking terrorism is absolutely one of the big topics on the table.
Finally, after the attack, many countries have agreed to strengthen cooperation against terrorism. What form of cooperation do we have now, and what needs to be done more effectively?
There are so many things can be done. For example, shared information and also different organizations, different security services from each country work together, trying to locate the suspect and then trying to make sure that the next attack is not going to happen, and also make sure that the communities, not only coming from the local community but also international community, stand together, trying to say that you are trying to disturb our life, but we are not going to give in. We are not going to be defeated by you.
Thank you very much, Wang Xingang, local councillor of Manchester Central, joining us from London. Now, here is my first point. Although countries have pledged to unite in their fight against terrorism, this latest attack proves this is just rhetoric. In fact, there has been no global coordination in action, unlike on some other issues such as climate change. Countries cannot even come to consensus as to the definition of terrorism, one of the reasons why no effective cooperation can be carried out. For the UK, as elections are coming up and Brexit negotiations set to start, what can the new government offer to make the country safer when terrorist attacks can be carried out by its own citizens? The refugees have been scapegoated as potential terrorists and been barred from entering the country by wire fences across the British Channel. With this incident, the bigger challenge, it appears, or at least as big as preventing the free flow of personnel, is to integrate existing minorities who are already on British shores. Turning to the Philippines, President Rodrigo Duterte's first visit to Russia was unexpectedly spoiled on Tuesday by clashes between government forces and Muslim extremists in the southern city of Marawi. Philippine officials say government troops and police were hunting down a leader of the infamous Abu Sayyaf group and the Philippine head of the Islamic State. Now, Duterte has declared the country's southern island of Mindanao under martial rule for 60 days and cut short his trip to Moscow. Before heading home, he had a hasty meeting with his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin and demanded support from Russia with arms to fight against ISIS, which was supposed to be the top priority of his trip. So will the arms deal be affected by this incident? And also, Duterte's trip to Russia as well as his visit to China last week were regarded as part of an effort to realign his country's foreign policy away from the United States. As a traditional ally to the US, is the Philippines really pivoting to Beijing and Moscow? Joining me in the discussion is Richard Haydarian, an Asian affairs expert based in Manila, and from Ipswich, UK, Dr. Natasha Kurt from the Department of War Studies at King's College London. Welcome to both of you. Now, latest sources say now in Marawi, Muslim extremists abducted a Catholic priest and more than a dozen churchgoers while burning down buildings, ambushing soldiers and hoisting flags of the Islamic State. Mr. Haydarian, how serious is the case at this moment?
Well, actually, the group involved is not the Abu Sayyaf group, which has been involved in a lot of kidnap and ransom operations in the Sulu Sea and the Celebes Sea, and also last month in Bohol in Visayas region of the Philippines. The group we are talking today about is the Maute group, a new group that came to prominence last year, February, when it attacked Philippine military installations. And it's actually formally named as the Islamic State of Lanao, or Lanao del Sur. It's a relatively obscure small group that is using the ISIS flag as a primary marketing strategy. I think the attack in Marawi was part of that propaganda ploy in order to establish themselves, establish their bona fide, and show that they're a force to reckon with. So far, the Western Military Command of the Philippines saying that the situation by and large is under control, and they're now involved in some mopping out operations, although on the ground certain reports suggest that the situation is definitely not yet under control. Nonetheless, it seems to be critical enough or crucial enough for President Duterte to cut short his very important trip to Russia and to declare a martial law, not only in Marawi City, which is a very small part of the whole Mindanao region where Duterte comes from, but to declare a martial law all over the country. And martial law is quite a huge thing, because the only way, based on the Philippine Constitution, that you can declare a martial law is that there should be a state of rebellion or state of invasion. So maybe the government is suggesting here that this could be part of a broader coordinated plans by ISIS affiliate groups that the Philippine government is trying to fight against.
Dr. Kurt, what is your take of the seriousness of the situation and also the timing? Do you think it's a coincidence that this happened while Duterte was just about to start his week-long visit to Russia?
Well, I'm not an expert on Filipino affairs, but obviously it's very unfortunate that it coincided with the trip to Moscow. I mean, who knows, maybe it was deliberate.
Also, Dr. Kurt, now according to Philippine officials, the trip was expected to lead to deals in defense, security, legal assistance, tourism, the peaceful use of nuclear energy and cultural exchange. Duterte also indicated that one of the top priorities of the trip would be to acquire Russian-made precision armament, and he reiterated during the brief meeting with Putin. Let's take a listen first to what he said.
To buy, if you can grant me a soft loan, if I have the money and pay right away, because the arms that we ordered from America was cancelled, and I'm having a problem now with the ISIS, if there's a rebellion.
Dr. Kurt, how do you think the abrupt ending of the visit would affect the kind of cooperation that Duterte had in mind with regards to the arms deal with Russia?
Well, I mean, if there's an arms deal in progress, I'm not sure that cutting short the trip in and of itself will necessarily affect a possible arms deal. I mean, I think that Russia will have to be very careful anyway about agreeing any very major arms deals with Philippines, because it's already supplying arms to Vietnam and others in the region, so I think it has to be a little bit careful. So I think some of the reports about, you know, possible arms deals were perhaps a little bit exaggerated.
And Mr. Haydarian, what is your take on this issue? Do you think that the deal, if Duterte's trip would not have been interrupted, would have gone ahead?
Well, I think the Philippines' pivot to the east, or its diversification policy away from the United States, is going to continue. I mean, 75% of the total armaments of the Philippines comes only from one country, the United States. And now there is a problem between those two allies because the United States has certain legal restrictions on sending certain types of armaments to countries that may use it for activities that may lead to human rights violations. So this is essentially Duterte's war on drugs. So in light of certain disagreements and in light of the Philippines' over-dependence on the United States, is looking for alternative suppliers, and Russia, of course, is a good candidate. Now, since last year, there have been multiple trips by Filipino top officials, including the Secretary of Defense, Delfin Lorenzana, to Russia. So the trip by Duterte was more actually symbolic, more of like breaking the ice. So the other officials, senior officials, can continue and take off where Duterte left. And it's very important to take into consideration that Putin actually made sure that he can still meet Duterte before he goes home, which shows how much Duterte and Putin have this kind of personal affinity, if not ideological affinity. Now, looking forward, I think Russia wants to sell the Philippines advanced armaments. It wants to make money. Russian economy is not doing well at all. But at the same time, on the part of the Philippines, they're looking at the terms of payment. They're looking at the configuration of Russian equipment and whether they can fit into the Philippines training and already westernized technology. And of course, there are also concerns about, whether the Philippines has enough fiscal space to buy very expensive weapons from Russia. But I think above all, Russia also has to be careful, as our guest in Britain has been saying, that Russia has been already funding countries like Vietnam essentially against China in the South China Sea. So, yes, because of Russia's good relations with China, it has to be careful not to be seen as if it's arming China's rivals in the South China Sea.
Dr. Kurt, now, since taking office last June, Duterte has visited China twice and Russia once, but has yet to pay an official visit to its traditional allies in Europe and in the United States. What is the motivation behind his decisions? Is he realigning his country's foreign policy towards Beijing and Moscow?
I guess he doesn't have that many other options. I mean, as your previous guest, who is much more of an expert on the Philippines, said, he needs to diversify the supply of weapons. Clearly, with the United States, it's problematic because the United States usually attaches various strings to any arms deals, particularly human rights considerations and certain conditionalities. So, if you're in Duterte's position, it's clearly, perhaps advantageous to move towards deals with Russia. But I think also, as your other guest hinted, striking new deals and new relationships in terms of weapons procurement is not always that easy. There's sort of a lot of bureaucracy, a lot of hoops that have to be jumped through, and there's sort of institutional relationships between defence establishments can take time, and so it may not happen that quickly, and Russia will also be quite cautious about the strategic balance in the region, I think.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kurt, joining us from King's College London. And Mr. Haydarian, let me ask you a bit more about the domestic situation in the Philippines. Now, what kind of pressure is he facing in the Philippines in terms of his foreign policy? How is the public reacting to his policy trend?
Well, I've written very extensively on this issue. I think definitely there is some tension between Duterte himself and the defense establishment in the Philippines, which is more oriented towards America and has quite skeptical view, if not a suspicious view, towards China. But so far, I think Duterte has convinced the military and the broader population to give him time, to give him space, to give him the opportunity to try out a peaceful solution with China. Because the reality is that under the previous Aquino administration, when the Philippines adopted a confrontational traditional policy towards China, it actually contributed to rising tensions. It contributed to a collapse in institutionalized diplomatic dialogue. And the reality was that the United States was also not the most reliable ally, and now under the Trump administration, U.S. reliability continues to be a big question. So I think there is a reluctant support given to Duterte, but I think if ever there will be accidental clashes or some major developments in the South China Sea, let's say China reclaims the Scarborough Shoal, then I think a pushback against Duterte could intensify, not only among the military, but also among the broader population, because China's approval and favorability in the Filipino eye is still quite low.
Yeah, which is not the case at this moment, because China just held its first ever bilateral talks with the Philippines in terms of the South China Sea issue is involved. At least for now, that's a good start. Let's see where that is taking us. Thank you very much, Mr. Haydarian, joining us from Manila. And you have been watching The Point, and here is my last point. It's clear President Duterte is trying to walk a fine line, balancing his country's relationship with Russia, China, and its traditional ally of the United States. In a way, this reflects the growing trend of how countries are reflecting on the future of the world order, shifting from relying on one superpower to forging friendly relations with multiple players at the same time. You can call him a pragmatist or an opportunist, but by trying to ride several boats at the same time, he could maximize the national interests of his country in a way that has not been possible before. The prerequisite is he can masterfully build these relationships at the same time without upsetting any party, while at the same time maintain domestic stability. The fact that Duterte had to cut short his visit to Moscow is a reminder of the harsh reality he faces at home. And that's all for this edition of The Point with Melia Sheen. As always, follow me on Twitter or visit our Facebook page using the handle The Point with LX. Download the application called CGTN Live to watch our show on your mobile devices, or go to YouTube and look for CGTN The Point. Thanks for watching.